right, we're about to start now. And we're only at 45 minutes, so we're gonna, this will be fun and full of data. Yeah, all right, so everybody's here for the advanced Amazon ads, and I make a joke always about, anything that's called advanced never is, but we're going to cover Amazon ads a little differently than I would suggest most sessions do. I kind of analogize this to the difference between college and a trade school. College will teach you a little bit about everything, and you're only going to use a certain part of it. Trade school is going to go teach you how to do the job. So there's no way I would be able to cover everything about everything, in Amazon's services. So I'm really going to be focusing on, from a practical reality, what do I find to be the most effective, and what are the methods to get there, and give you enough information to kind of understand how this stuff works. Because inevitably, you don't want to be using the tool. You want to understand how the tool works and then analyze, if it's not working the way you want it, why? Try to figure out why. So this is all about trying to understand how this infrastructure works. Now, caveat emptor, I don't normally teach this class. This is something that Craig had asked me about, and my background is so a long time ago I worked for a three-letter service out in the East Coast, and I've worked in Silicon Valley most of the rest of the time. I reverse engineer things. I figured things out without enough information that is public. So I have done a reasonable job of trying to figure out on my own how some of this AMS works, how it thinks, and how to make it do what I want it to do, which is inevitably, hopefully, what you guys want it to do, which is help me sell stuff in an efficient manner. And when I started writing, so I write all sorts of different genres. Oh, sorry. All right.
Usually pay double for that.
Yeah. All right. Everybody hear me? All right. So when I started, I knew inevitably. I mean, I know a lot of people, a lot of the more successful writers. I knew that 100% of them, in the six-figure, seven-figure, everybody has a marketing budget. They're all spending money on marketing. So it was not a matter of if, it was a matter of when I was going to go start, investing on the marketing side of things. And so I have a couple friends who are very successful. So I went ahead and, I knew I was going to be investing probably a decent amount of money. So I was like, all right, let me learn on my own. And I started experimenting, and I wasn't really particularly satisfied with the instructions that I had and the results that I was seeing. And I started comparing notes. So I've got pretty good friends who have done this for a long time, and we did an experiment, and we targeted a particular book. He wrote in the same genre as I was, and we both had a new book that was coming out, so we targeted it. And I realized very quickly that even though we used the same parameters, because I wanted to understand why was my, why were the ads so inefficient for what I was doing, and because I wasn't happy with the ACOS, I wasn't happy with click-through, I wasn't happy with any of it, and so I compared notes, and we did it kind of side by side, literally, and I realized, wait a minute, you're bidding the same. You're doing everything the same as me, but like when I'm landing on the product detail page, let's say for the 30 cent or whatever the click was, his landed on page 2, mine was like on page 17, where no one was ever going to see it. Now, at that point in time, I'm like, okay, there's more to it than meets the eye. The user's manual isn't going to help me. I need to go roll up my sleeves and figure out what's going on. I do this for a living. I should be able to do this. And so this is kind of where my journey started on figuring this stuff out. And that's where Craig had asked, because he knew about some of the stuff that I've done, and it's like, okay, let me go ahead and teach this type of session, give you an idea of what I do, and in the end, I'll give you. I like to say this: there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all formula, but I will give you a formula for what I do as a very general-purpose formula. Now, obviously, Amazon wants to sell stuff, and you've got, we'll focus on books. They obviously sell all sorts of things, but there's also the genres. How do I get the matchmaker? Her job is to go ahead and match up one boy with one girl, and that's how she gets paid. So that's how Amazon gets paid, and the algorithm that they use, that's its sole purpose. All it wants to do is sell stuff. So what's the best way of selling stuff? It wants to go ahead and make the purchaser happy, and obviously it wants to sell your stuff. But how does it do that? It's a program. So you're gonna have to feed it information. So, this first part of the presentation, I'm gonna get technical. So, this a technical background. I will get technical, but you don't really need to get the details of the technical background. I want, as I'm going over through some of this that, like 75% of you guys are gonna go, it's mind-numbing. I want you to get the gist of what think of it like, from the algorithm's perspective. It's trying to be the matchmaker. So how does it know which boy meets with what girl, or what boy meets with what boy, or whatever? How does it make that love connection between reader and author? So, I mocked up an algorithm to give you an idea of how to represent this information. So, and I boiled it down to like 4 things. There's a sales history for your book, the book you're trying to advertise. There's a keyword relevance. We'll talk about all these. The sales, so in addition to the sales history relevance, it's like, all right, what's the total sales count? And then, what's the bid? What are you bidding for that click from the reader? So, again, we're gonna get a little technical, but I've tried to make this somewhat relatable. So let's cover the first thing first, the sales history. So I'm just giving this as an example. This is not exactly how it works, but this is a good mock-up to represent the idea. So imagine you've got a book that you're selling. Let's say it's a thriller. You're trying to sell a thriller. So if we're going to look at the sales history of the thriller, and this is where, the biggest mistake new authors make when they're, starting to market stuff, and it's not an obvious mistake that they make. The mistake they make is they tell their friends, they tell their grandmother, they tell their aunt and uncle, and I've got this new book. People who would normally never buy that genre, or maybe don't read at all, they're buying this book. So what does the algorithm take from that? They're learning, all right, thriller book number 1 was bought by somebody who normally buys chocolate, diet food, and protein powder. Okay, well, let me see if I can make a match. And then, maybe the second book was bought by somebody who actually does read a thriller, but, video games and gardening supplies. Okay, well, all right, there's more data. And you're starting to accumulate data. And again, this is a program, so it's dealing with numbers, and it's, hashing things together. So like book sales, like, okay, for anyone who's looking for a thriller, book 1 isn't a thriller, it seems. So far, book 1 sale tells me there's no relevance to thriller here. It's like, oh, wait a minute, book 2? Oh, all right, we've sold 2 books. One of them seems to be relevant to thriller. So this has a 50% score for relevancy. And then, but book 3 is science fiction and batteries. Not so much thriller. So we're down to 33.33%. Book 4, gardening supplies, clothes, and batteries. All right, we're down to 25%. Now we got a thriller purchase, we're up to 40%. So you can see how it starts to ebb and flow based on the history of sales. And then, because ultimately what I'm kind of peeling, lifting the covers for is a reader is looking for a thriller. And you're selling a thriller. And the algorithm is just saying, okay, I'm trying to service both ends. And I'm going, all right, well, this book has a relevancy score, let's say, of 33%. So what's it going to do with that information? He's looking for the reader, he, she, whatever, is looking for a thriller. You got a 33%. All other things being equal, if I'm going to go ahead and find a book that's relevant 35%, 50%, 70%, I'm going to put that one on top of the list. You're going to start falling lower and lower into the list. So if you've got a very bad relevancy score for history, that's not going to help your case in having the matchmaker make you a match. So that gives you an idea of like the history relevance. And this is all going to build on top of each other. Now, the keyword relevance. Now, there's another section. So, and there's hints of this out in the open that tell you, hey, you need to have, it's kind of like an SEO relevance where in your product details, you need to mention thriller or you need to mention something. And there's actually wisdom to that. If you mention thriller or some words that the algorithm hooks as equivalent to thriller, it's going to go ahead and say, okay, let me see this particular book. Does it actually mention thriller? Is there a direct hit? Maybe I'll give that a plus 100, on that score. Well, what if it doesn't have a thriller, but it has, let's say, a related term? Well, then, maybe the algorithm is going to say, well, maybe it's a thriller. It's got some jargon in it that is often related with thrillers. So maybe I'll just give it a plus 50. And then if it can't find anything that's even related, then maybe it's just going to get a plus 0. So this all again builds in to, there's inevitably going to be a formula. And again, most of you are going to kind of fuzz out on this, but imagine that there's this calculation that happens, where it's going to take the sales count. Imagine with sales history, the more sales history you have, the more data the algorithm has to work with. And then it's going to take, the relevance. There's going to, for both keywords and the history and the overall sales count. Because, for instance, how confident is the algorithm about its guess as to this match if there was only 14 books sold versus, let's say, 14,000? 14,000, it's going to be very confident about whatever it's calculated because it's got a lot of data to back it up. 14%, or 14 sales, it's going to be shaky about it. So that all fits into a formula. And then ultimately, you're going to get some kind of match score. So it's going to run through all of this stuff. And then ultimately, and this is all happening in a blink of an eye, obviously. So when the reader is looking for the thriller, the reader is going to be presented with a list of books. Top of the list is going to be, based on some algorithm, the thing that the algorithm thinks will most likely be interesting to the reader. Based on, let's say, these metrics. And I've got some examples. So let's say case one. So remember, that situation where I ran into, where we bid, let's say, 30 cents each, but I was on the, page 17, he was on page 2. So this kind of shows you an example of how something like that could happen, using that formula that I just described. Case one was a book with a solid history, 75%, and these are campaigns. So these are different campaigns, with different books, and and they're bidding 40 cents a click. Okay, so that gives it enough information to come up with, let's say, a match score of 0.7. Okay, doesn't mean anything yet. Case two, another one with solid history. And case one had 100 sales. Case two, they're bidding only 30 cents with the same kind of history, but it had 500 sales. Now, oddly enough, the bid is lower, but the match score is higher. And because it has more data now to work with, and it's more confident about its match. Now, case 3, there's no history. So, and oftentimes, and this is where people starting off, when there's no history, they have a hard time getting traction. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that. How do you get traction? And you want the right traction. You don't want grandma buying it, because I kind of demonstrated that it'll hurt you more than help. But a new book, and they're bidding 50 cents, trying to overcome the algorithm, and no history, and obviously no sales. It's got so far the lowest match score, 0.25, based on that formula. And then case 4, let's say it's a erratic history. It's either the descriptions aren't very good, or whatever, or you had a lot of grandma sales and that didn't apply to it, whatever. And they're bidding 45 cents. So how does that all kind of wash out? In the end, what is the algorithm going to present to the reader? Case number 2, which was the one with the most sales, and oddly enough, the lowest bid, is going to get top of the list. So, which is exactly what I saw when I was comparing with my friend who, theoretically, he had a much larger following, he had some immediate sales, et cetera, and he was bidding the same amount. So case 2, or in case 1, the 40 cents, and oddly enough, the one who bid the most, ended up on the bottom. And if, like for instance, if case 3, if the one on the bottom wanted to get to where case 4 is, they would need to bid $1.26 instead of 50 cents. If they wanted to get to the second place, they need to bid $1.40. And to actually get to case, to the first place, to overcome all of that history, they have to bid over $3. So it just gives you an idea how important some of these elements are to how the algorithm calculates its relevance. And ultimately, you want your campaign to be presented to the reader. So this is giving you some background on how that algorithm thinks, because it's trying to do the right thing. And actually, before I even go to the next slide, some of the things to influence. So I talk about it in a couple slides, but what I do is when I'm trying to influence the algorithm and I'm about to release something, I don't tell anybody on my friends list. Even though a lot of my friends, I've got a very large following on social media, and a lot of them are readers. But I don't necessarily know their backgrounds, and will get confused. So, and I would say for people with smaller followings, and it gets more chaotic usually. So I'll oftentimes run an ad that's very targeted, like Facebook. I might run a Facebook ad that is people who like science fiction or like thrillers in this case, and try to attract the clicks from people who are definitely the right genre, and get them to the right place. Or if I'm going to run any kind of ad, I want it to be a targeted ad to people who have a history of only buying thrillers. So like I have a large mailing list, and I have it kind of bucketed now. Where are they a thriller reader? Are they a science fiction? Are they both? So I'll maybe use my mailing list, which are targeted as well. So it feeds that sales history right away before I start opening it up to the world and saying, hey, this thing's out. So I kind of prime the pump so that the right people are buying first, because I don't want to fight against myself, against the bad history, because it's kind of like steering the boat. It's like it takes a lot of time and energy to actually course correct. Now, sometimes these ads are kind of like they're all sort of esoteric. So I kind of wanted to emphasize where do these things land? Where do these campaigns that we're creating actually run on Amazon? So, there's a lot of places where they call top of search. So when someone's searching for a thriller, or in this case, I looked up something else, you're going to get this ordered list. This has nothing to do with anybody else's book. You're just going to get, it's not like product details. That's another kind of thing. This is the ordered list based on a specific search that you made, and you'll see potentially, I guess, here, like it's the sponsored tag. Those things ended up showing up only because I had active campaigns, and you'll notice I have two that ended up showing up because I do have separate campaigns for an ebook versus paperback, and we'll talk about that because there's a difference in cost basis, and it's really key to actually go do that because the profit on an ebook is very different than the profit on a paperback, and the ACOS becomes meaningless if you sort of mix them together. Because then I'm a big believer in you want data and you want accurate data, because only with data can you actually go do something useful. And as soon as you start mixing things together and you muddle it up, you end up hurting yourself. So in this case, I have obviously separate campaigns because like any single campaign that advertise, let's say you bundled both books together, it wouldn't show it twice. So this is an indicator that I have separate campaigns. One obviously had an ebook version and one had a paperback version, and they both hit. And the algorithm treated them. Now, oddly enough, the first, if it weren't for these, the first thing would have ended up showing my book anyway. So, anyone who clicking on here, could have just as well clicked here, but you can't predict that. You wouldn't always show up as the first person on the list, but in this case, it was a relevant hit. Let's see, more. So here's an example of in the product detail page for anybody's book. Now remember, when we're running campaigns, we're running campaigns either for the main interface for Amazon, like that top of search, where someone is at essentially the main menu for Amazon and saying, I'm looking for this. Or they're at some other book or product of some kind. And we've often seen underneath products related to this item. And what you want is you want to be able to show up here. So in this case, this is the algorithm at work. My ebook showed up on page 4 of 41 in this particular case. And in this case, I was, I had something that showed up on the first page of a related, in this case it's a paperback, but first page of the carousel. This is where I described where the other guy landed on page 2. I was on page 17. So obviously the further down if I'm on page 37, no one's going to ever see it. You're not going to get any clicks. You're not going to get any impressions. You're not going to pay anything. It doesn't harm you. It doesn't help you either. So the higher on the page rank that you get, the more likely you'll get an impression. Someone will see it, and the more likely you might get a click and hopefully a purchase. And then one thing I don't do much with personally, because I've never found it to be very effective, but there is brand advertising, and it's kind of a misnomer. I mean, the intent here is, like if I were Michael Crichton, it's like, and I'd be showing more than one book. I'm showing my brand. So, and these will show up, like in the case where I was, on the Amazon main menu searching for something. Occasionally, you'll see an ad that pops up, this is a branding type of ad. So, I personally don't use them, and largely because I've not found them to be effective. That doesn't necessarily mean they aren't effective in the right circumstances. I've just yet to find the circumstance that I'd invest in. But it is there, and that's largely where your books will land. Now, there's another place, and this this is a place where as you sell more, you will inevitably, again, Amazon is the matchmaker. They're trying to make this love connection between the reader and the author. And when they start seeing, like for instance, Mark Dawson ends up on all of my books in Germany, and I end up on his in Germany. So we obviously have a lot of common readership, at least certainly in Germany. And so this is a case where you'll oftentimes this is either customers who viewed it or customers who bought it. It's kind of an analog of each other. So if a lot of Michael Crichton fans, if a lot of Michael Crichton fans buy Rothman's books, you might see me, my book show up in one of these kind of categories, listed there. I didn't pay for it to be there. Amazon did it because, again, it's trying to make a sale. Even if I didn't pay for it to show up, they're still, their bottom line is, yes, we're all paying for ads, but inevitably they're also making money selling the book. So they want to sell the book just as much as we do. So, and again, this is, this kind of stuff is, you start landing on the also bots, is what I call them, as you sell more. And as your brand and your style of writing gets an association with other authors and other books. So this happens organically. But again, this is free. This is not something you can influence other than, if you're making something in the style of somebody else or just happen to be, this is what could happen. All right, so now what? We kind of have an idea of what the algorithm's trying to do. There's obviously elements that go into it on how it makes these decisions. Let's start talking about things a little more tactically. So I'm only going to cover a couple of key things. So I'm going to, so key learnings here. So automatic campaigns. So I use two types of campaigns very specifically. One, because I want to make my life easy, and two, I find them effective. And I'll show you some examples. Oddly enough, when Craig had asked me to do this, I had just, I'd been experimenting, because I didn't want to be in the business of doing my own marketing. And I wanted, I was hoping that some of these services, that I'd engaged with might be able to take some of that off my hands. Turned out, I gave them like 9 months and they were never able to get the efficiency that I was, not even close to what I was able to do myself manually. So I had just fired them when Craig had asked me to do this. So everything you're going to see here is largely data from then, from like middle of October to now. So, and so I have automatic campaigns. I use those to collect data. Like an automatic campaign is interesting because it's using no input from us other than how much are you willing to pay for a click. But it's going to go ahead and, based on all the data it has, it's going to go try to make love connections as it can. And it'll inform you as things evolve over time, the search terms that, ended up being connections. Now, they may not have turned into orders, which is useful data as well, but eventually you're going to have a long list of search terms that were actually used to make these connections. And I'll show you what we do with those. So it's a good way of, kind of scooping up data. And here's another thing. A lot of people make this mistake, and I'm a big believer in getting data and getting accurate data. So I never, ever put more than one book in a campaign. Now, and I do that strictly speaking, and this runs contrary to advice that many people give. So here's the gotcha. When I'm going ahead and running a campaign, so like for instance, here's an example of search terms, and it's very hard to see, but all you have here is the search terms that actually hit and some stats, like what was it, how many orders, sales, ACOS, etc. And if you have more than one book in a campaign, you get these search terms anyway, but you don't know which book it's associated with. So if you have 3 or 4 or 5 books, I'm like, all right, this was a good search term. I want to use it, but against which book? I don't know. And what you end up doing is you end up, so can you make a campaign with those search terms and just have to copy all those books? Yes, but it's inefficient because maybe it didn't work for 3 out of the 4 books. It was only good for that one book. So now you're potentially spending clicks that aren't going to get you sales. You're harvesting this data to use it, in one way or another. So if you limit your campaigns to 1 book per campaign, it gives you solid information that you know what to do with. I don't like ambiguity when I'm collecting information. So when I get these search terms, I know that it's associated with a book. All right. Now, the kind of customers. So, I talked about external, trying to feed the pump of the algorithm. So realize that where you do these ads affect who your readers are. Like BookBub is useful, but really it's targeted to KU members. Prime members read for free. That's kind of like an ad that you could run, but it's for people who are really buying things at a discount. Facebook actually is more useful in that case. I'm not a big fan of Facebook in general, but from an ad perspective, it's okay because they're wide and they're not necessarily married to the cheap concept. People will buy whatever book is there that catches their interest, and the gotcha is that the reality is 75% of customers, certainly in English-speaking world, are Amazon customers. And then obviously AMS, services everybody on Amazon. So I'm going to race through that, but I wasn't intending to race that quickly. So there's a series of strategies. Now, I focus on efficiency. So, and I have a lot more text here. It's really useful for offline reading. I'm not going to go over all of this, but on Eventi, I've uploaded a copy of this presentation so you can actually download it and read it offline. But one of the things you want to actually know is what's your cost basis for things. Inevitably, we think of ebooks 70%. We're used to the idea, or possibly 35%, but 70% for most people. Paperback, we're thinking 60%, but it's not because there's print costs involved. So, like on an example book that I use, my cost base is about 26% to break even. So, the ACOS gets goofy then because it's like for you to break even, that's 70% on an ebook. It's 26% for paperback, and that's why you want to keep them separate. Obviously, there's something called read-through, where if you have a 5-book series, you can calculate like how many people who buy book 1 end up at, let's say, book 5, and let's say it's 60% of book 1 buyers end up at book 5. So you can actually calculate based on, first book purchases that each customer is worth, let's say, $15 to you or something. So you can actually calculate what's profitable, what's not profitable. So hypothetically, if every customer was a $15 customer in this scenario, you could afford an ACOS of 300%. I would never do that, but you could. And I have a URL that helps you. He goes through a pretty decent job of how do you calculate read-through. I'm going to run through these real quick because we're low on time. But basically, the strategies for bids, I actually prefer to use up and down when I'm searching to figure out how much should I bid. Because up and down allows, it kind of expands the Overton window of what's acceptable to bid. And I always start low as I can, 20 cents, 15 cents, whatever, just to see, because I want to understand what's going on, what actually hits. And inevitably, so, here's an example from, I think October 21st, where I started the campaigns after firing everybody. What I'm gathering. And so, on a paperback, I'm seeing an ACOS of, let's say, 48%. Now, that's, believe it or not the most optimum. It can get better than that. So, and these are the ACOS for like the different campaigns you see. And I'll note that the bottom one, 121%, that's the one, that's a book I just released. So it has a weaker sales history. So oddly enough, the ACOS for that is higher than the rest. So, which follows strongly with the behavior of the algorithm. Ebook, you would expect, the cost basis is higher and the ACOS would end up being higher, and it is. ACOS is about 105% right now. I do get better than that. That's ACOS. Now, category. I actually use category a lot. And here's the reason. Very low click bid costs. And I'm a big believer in impressions. So this is more a psychological thing than anything else. But if you see a book cover here and there, you keep seeing the same thing, it sticks in someone's head, and you can start to seek it out. So if you can get a lot of impressions for a cheaper price, there's goodness associated with that. So, and I just kind of compare here, like those automatic campaigns is costing me roughly, €85 for 72,000 impressions, 22 for 30. So these aren't very different in price. And then I've got €10 for 65,000 impressions. It's much cheaper. So I like to use categories because one, it doesn't pigeonhole me to certain targets, and it allows me to go ahead and, target a very wide audience and very low click costs. One mistake that people make is there are a lot of, if anyone has ever run into a situation where they've targeted a category and they don't get any impressions, I'll actually skip to the next one. So here's an example where, like this is a techno thriller. But notice that in techno thriller, I have the number of books that are under that category is relatively small. And that means that my book campaign is going to show up in very few places. Whereas, or thriller and suspense, very small, 150 to 250. But thriller and suspense action fiction, which isn't really much different, logically speaking, 15,000 to 25,000. So suddenly, now you can realize why do some categories work and some don't. It has a lot to do with, what's the population that you're targeting. And you really want to focus on that. Because I focus primarily on things that have a higher target, higher number of targets. So yeah, you can read through the keyword targeting. I don't actually use it. This is, again, I've got a Cliff Notes at the end for this, but here's a whole bunch of strategies that I personally use. And this is where I go ahead and I run a report, and I'll just do this very quickly, and we're almost out of time. So this gives you an idea. Like one of the things that I do is I look for, and I haven't had enough time to actually do this properly, but I normally wait about 2 months, and I do a search for all the campaigns. Actually, let me show you. All the campaigns that had greater than 7 clicks and 0 orders, which basically means I'm getting clicks, but I'm not getting orders, so I'm wasting money. So what do I want to do? I want to end up killing those things. And here's an example. Clicks, and then sales are 0. So then I'm going to go start looking at okay. Which ones, do I need to go ahead and which terms do I want to add to my negative terms list? So this is where I know which campaign it is, and then I know what search term is failing me, and I start adding it to my to my list of negative terms. And again, I'm sorry I'm going through this very quickly. Here is literally, this is the last page. This is my Cliff Notes. You want to stop all the losers, things that are losing you money. You want to add it to the negative keywords. Things that are, that have good clicks and they have orders, but the ACOS is way too high. Whatever way too high is for you. I'd suggest, decrease the bid by 50%. See what happens, and observe again 30 days later or whatever. Now you can also, if you're breaking even, or it's between breaking even and too high. Maybe you're gonna just, you want more efficiency, decrease it by 25%. And then, if you've got a really low ACOS and you want to get more aggressive and you want more sales, maybe you start incrementally increasing the bid just to see if you can get more traction. And I think that's largely it. And I don't think we have time for questions, but I'm currently in Facebook jail, but I will be out of Facebook jail in 3 days. So you guys can send me questions if you have any questions. I'll be able to respond. So, all right, thank you.